Yeah, so I wrote the book in 2014, and I realized it's probably time to take a look at it again. And sure enough, I decided just to rewrite the entire thing. So there's 9 chapters in. I'm working on chapter number 4 right now. I hope to have it done here by midsummer or so. And I'm really pleased that we've got some cool things we're doing with it this time, the publisher and me, which I think is going to make it a really much better book than it ever was before. The information will still be deep, but I'm going to change the information. I'm not going to do the same stuff again. It's some of the touches on the same things, but it's presented entirely differently now. So anyway, it's a good time for me to talk about that book.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's so interesting to see online how much interest there is in this particular topic. Like, fast after 50 for anyone who missed that at the very start there. But the master's conversation seems to be one that, well, I just noticed through emails and things that I get, people explaining what part of their career that they're in. It's very few elite and mostly people who have started running later in life or have just started to really enjoy it, and just asking questions around how it is to actually plan and structure. So I was like, all right, let's dedicate a whole one towards that. But I mean, just for my own curiosity, what are a couple of the big changes that have taken place in the book? Like you said, it wasn't so much the information as the structure. Is that right?
Yeah, we've changed the structure considerably. The information has changed a little bit, but there's not been that much change in the details of turning old as an athlete. But the structure of the book has changed dramatically. For example, one of the big changes I made was I started reaching out to try to find athletes who are in their 50s and 60s who are amazing athletes. And so I've come up with this list of world-class runners, cyclists, Nordic skiers, swimmers, rowers. It's just amazing. Once I started looking for people, they started coming to me. It's just amazing the people I've come up with, what they've accomplished, in their, one guy, for example, from, just give you an example, he's Greek, so they're from several countries. This guy is from Greece. He's about his age. I think he's like 54, 55 years old. He won his age group at Ironman Hawaii, the World Championship last year for that age group. He also, that same year, ran a 2:28 marathon. And he also that year won an ultra marathon for his age group. This guy, this guy is just typical of the people I found. So we're going to have a short piece, like a 1-page or 2-page piece about each of these athletes. There's like 16 of them I'm going to feature in the book. And I call them super masters. They're just people who are doing things that are really remarkable. So I'm trying to find out how they train, how they eat, how they sleep, what their lifestyle is like, what's behind all of this for these unique athletes. That's one of the focuses of the book, which is unique. It wasn't done anything like that in the previous book.
And so that's an interesting foundation, because without giving away too much of the content of the new book, I was keen to pick your brain around some of those topics. Like there's so many different points in this conversation that you could start. But I mean, as a potentially a bit of a scaffold for the start of the conversation, like the idea of some standout points around training with some of these elite athletes is really interesting, because often when I think of a 53-year-old athlete, I'm rarely thinking of someone running a 2:28 marathon. And even hearing that, it like opens up a can of worms as to how much potential is in the tank. And it's exciting for athletes who may have started later as well. Like, I'm not sure if you've got a good point to start that conversation from, or if there's a real standout feature around training or recovery or rest or nutrition.
Yeah.
Maybe we could all than one of those.
And there is so much. For example, let's just take one that's always, for all age groups is an issue, but especially if that becomes an issue for 50 plus, is the issue of intensity in training. How hard should your workouts be? Duration is no problem at all to figure out. Frequency is not a big deal, but intensity is really the thing that's kind of messes everybody up. It's hard to get it right. And it's getting, I think actually in some ways it's getting more difficult because of all the wearable devices we have right now, plus, power meters and all kinds of stuff that we have on the market. So athletes can monitor their intensity while they're in the midst of a workout or a race without any problem whatsoever. But it used to be not too many years ago, a few decades ago, I guess now, probably going back to the 1970s, before any of this stuff showed up, everybody did it by how they felt. And we started rating a perceived exertion. That was kind of the key. And so one of the things that I deal with athletes anymore is now the athletes fall into two categories. They kind of lost what this feeling of perceived exertion is. They don't think about that anymore at all. They look at their wrist to see what the heart rate is, or they look at their handlebars, see what the power meter says. That's the sort of stuff they look at, and they take that as being essentially how they feel, how they're doing. But really is inside. That's what am I experiencing right now? That is the key issue, which you've kind of lost. And so I want to always kind of like bring that up when I'm talking with athletes, and that's for sure part of this book, is that you've got to pay attention to how you feel. That's just as important, in fact, more important than all the numbers that you can possibly produce from all your wearables. The most critical element is how are you feeling right now? And what does that mean in terms of performance, in terms of recovery, in terms of health? There's all kinds of things that go into how you feel. We've kind of gotten away from that. So that's where I am. And one part of the book is really bringing that up as a critical point. And along that same line, another point is I find the masters athletes, they fall into, when it comes to intensity, they fall into two categories. One category is all they want to do is long, slow distance. They just want to go out and put in a long run, a long bike ride, whatever it may be. Just going to do something long and slow. And that's all they want to do every day. Then there's another category who's a little bit more competitive, and they believe the way to get faster is to do something somewhat hard every day. So if the workout calls for zone 2, they're going to do zone 3. If it calls for zone 3, they're going to do zone 4. They're always going to make it just a little bit harder than it needs to be because they think that is the path to performance. So I got these two categories of the people in this age group. The second category is more like the younger athletes. All this, only run slow is probably more along the lines of what you find with older athletes. So I got these two categories of athletes. And so that's one of my problems I'm dealing with athletes in this book is how do I make the point that there's a balance between these two? It's not one or the other. It's a little bit of both. And so I did a talk to a group here a while back, and one of the points I brought up was, what should your training be like in terms of intensity? Should it be all hard, all easy, mostly hard, or mostly easy? And don't tell me the answer to that question yet. You just got to put in the back of your mind what the answer is. Then let's go through the whole idea of the physiology of fitness. What happens? How's this come about? Especially endurance fitness. And then at the very end, I say, now what do you think is the answer to that question? Which is the thing? And almost everybody agreed with me at this point. The answer really is your training should be mostly easy. You should be trained mostly easy and occasionally hard. It's kind of like that stuff that's Stephen Seiler talks about with the 80-20 polarized rule. That's kind of the concept. And so that's where I'm trying to get masters athletes to go, is to that. So I kind of bring the only want to run slow and easy all the time up to do it a little bit of intensity. And I want to bring the people who want to do intensity all the time down to do a lot more easy stuff. So I'm trying to bring the two together into a happy medium to get more performance out of athletes.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that dynamic. It sounds like something that is perhaps evidence that I'm starting to move towards being a masters athlete. I mean, I'm 37, Joe, nearly 38, and one of the things after a few years away from competitive running that I've noticed is obviously I have to be a little patient with the return to the sport. And so for maybe the last 18 months, I've had a lot more of a focus on training mostly easy, in the sense that when I first returned to running, I trained like I did in 2014. I'd never really had an injury, and so I was probably under-equipped to effectively deal with injuries. But naturally, I came out, trained like I used to, and immediately just started getting calf strains and dealing with little niggles. And so I went to a period of training mostly easy, or probably all easy, that first class of athlete you were talking about, where it's just long, slow distance without any intensity, really, just building up quite slowly. But then I realized that as my body started to become stronger, my performance had pretty much plateaued. And so I've started over the last 12, 18 months to inject a lot more what's trying to be specific speed work in. And I find the balance has been interesting, but I find just the way that faster running correlates to the longer, slower running is always beneficial, whether it's like mental or actually physiological. I feel better running at a faster pace with less effort. But I always assume that masters athletes, this is probably a big assumption because there'd be so many new masters athletes. But in my mind, a masters athlete is one who's been through all those mistakes I just spoke about and are now older and responsible and know that perfect balance between those two things. So it's interesting to hear that it's still a theme amongst competitive master athletes, that they're trying to figure out what that best balance for their own goals is.
Yeah, it's an ongoing battle, I think, for all ages. But I find especially so for the older athletes, the masters, they seem to be a little bit confused on how to do it. But what they're thinking is, well, the person who wants to run all slow all the time, they're doing this because they enjoy it. It's fun. They're probably not so concerned about their performance, although they would like to run a faster 10K or whatever. But they're really doing this because they find it very very relaxing in the long term. Post workout and so forth, you sleep better and so forth. Everything fits together very nicely, and that's great. No problems whatsoever. I like to see that. And people think that the purpose they should be doing something that's harder all the time is because that makes sense. If you really want to perform, you need to push yourself to perform. You need to push yourself hard. This is the way. When I was a kid back in the 1950s, that's the way when they made movies about athletes, that's what they always had the athlete doing. He's doing something remarkably very, very difficult every day, every week, every month, every year, and eventually they became Olympians. That was the way the way the movie projected athletes back in that period of time. That's where these people still are today. If I'm going to be hard to be fast, I've got to work on being fast every day. I just can't take a day off from working to be fast. I got to push myself all the time. And so consequently, it's hard to change both of them because what they're both doing makes sense in one case to the way they feel and the other case to what they believe. But neither one is exactly right. There's room for both. So that's one of the points I'm going to try to make in the book. And building that up, one of the things I talked about in this book, in one of the chapters, was something called, what I call that chapter is Paleo Trinity. Paleo refers to Stone Age, like Paleolithic. And that's one of my interests in life outside of sport is anthropology. And so I spent a lot of time reading about Paleolithic peoples, and there are still a few left in the world today. And so I wrote about a group of these a Paleolithic tribe in Paraguay that a guy back in the 1990s wrote a book about, a professor from the University of New Mexico, I believe. And he went to Paraguay and eventually started living with these Stone Age people. He was a runner himself, and he wanted to see what their lifestyle was like, what they did throughout the day, what they ate, all this kind of stuff, how they slept, all that jazz stuff. So he wrote a book about what he's discovered. He spent 30 years living with it, the 1960s on up. But 30 years of his life devoted to following these people. So he wrote this book, this little thick book about what's called the Ache, A-C-H-E, people of Paraguay. And what he talks about, he describes their lifestyle. He's basically described an endurance athlete's lifestyle, the way it should be with this 80-20 concept. They go hunting, for example, at the start of the day. And they start out very, very slowly. They're trying to find where the animals may be that they're trying to capture. And this may take them an hour or 2 hours just to find the animals. So all this is really slow. It's walking, jogging, really slow, nothing fast whatsoever. Then when they finally find the animal they're looking for, they've got to run it to exhaustion. Because humans are probably the most one of the most endurance-abled athletes or world of animals, I should say, on the planet. We are great at endurance. We're actually terrible at speed. You can take the fastest 100-meter athlete in the world and pair him up against almost any other animal in the world, and the animals will always win a 200-meter dash. We're just very, very slow, but we have great endurance. Almost no animal in the world has the endurance we have. Horses have great endurance, and a few others, but we're in this rare group of endurance athletes. So what these Ache people did was they would finally find the animal, and then they would start chasing it, and they would just run it into the ground. They may chase another hour until the animal finally fatigues, and now they've got their kill. They've got their meal for the day. So they had to spend at the very end, spend some time sprinting to get to this animal. And that's basically the 80-20 rules, what that's describing. Then they carry it back to where the tribe is meeting. And so now they have to carry with an animal that may weigh 300, 400 pounds. They may cut it into pieces, but they've still got big weights they've got to carry. And so they get some strength training in it. And when they get back to the tribe, and now they'll bring in water for the tribes. They find ways to carry water, and they got to carry that back from a stream or a lake or wherever it may be close by. So there's all the stuff that they do that is basically the athlete's lifestyle. They were living our lifestyle millennia before we'd ever thought of doing this stuff. They were already doing it. So I try to use that as a point to explain that we have the genetics of Stone Age people. We are meant to live just like these people live. We are not meant to sit in front of a TV or a computer all day long and push buttons. We're meant to be out running, doing something with motion to it. And that's one of the first things I do in the book is talk about these people, and then I begin to bring out how that applies to you as an athlete. What does this mean? How does this mean for you to live your life? Because you are basically, I made the point that we live in what's now called the Neolithic period, which means New Stone Age. It's farming. When New Stone Age started, it's about 12,000 years ago. It was farmers, and people settled in villages, no longer out hunting and gathering food. Now they began to grow their food and raise animals. And so consequently, their lifestyle began to change. But that's only been, if you look at the history of man, that's only been like the last 30 seconds of our time on the planet. If you think about a 24-hour clock represents the entire time that hominids have been on this planet, which is humans. It's only been just for a few seconds that we've been doing the Neolithic period. So where we've been, what we're doing is really brand new. We're still in this brand new phase, and we're still adapting to this. We're still Stone Age. We're still meant to be runners. We're still meant to be outside doing things, lifting heavy objects, moving things all the time, not just sitting on your butt watching a TV. So I'm trying to make that point in the book, so I can, when I get to the point about intensity and easy and hard and so forth, I can relate back to what the Ache people did. This is how they lived. This is how you're meant to live. So that's kind of what I'm doing to the book, which is fun. For me, it's fun. I'm hoping the readers like it too, but I'm having a great time writing about it.
Yeah, no, for me, it's fun to hear about as well. I'm trying to think of this guy's name, Abdinarium or something. I butchered his name. He's a British journalist, and he wrote a book called Running with the Kenyans. And that story goes it was a really, really good book. But the story goes that in his late 30s, he made the move from the UK to Kenya to see if there was one last shot at running improvement. And he went there and essentially just delved into the world of, hey, what is it that these Kenyan athletes are doing so effectively? And naturally, there is a whole heap of things. But what I found really interesting was almost all of the best Kenyans that he was training with, so the best of the best in terms of Kenyan runners, was that so many of them were coming from like a farming background. And their lifestyle was obviously different to what you just explained with the Paleolithic people to an extent, but the amount of time they were spending on feet, that combination of endurance and strength training through whether it was moving hay or moving water to moving animals as a foundation to actually launch from, being a child in that environment to being 15 and going, okay, now I'm going to pursue this running training career. not only the sort of ability to handle the discomfort that comes with endurance training, but just that functional fitness that they would have been able to bring to their actual endurance training, he believed was a really key factor in what was such a standout point for so many of these athletes. So it's interesting that, whether you're looking at Paleolithic or whether you're looking at this small example of a small group of Kenyans, there does seem to be a real crossover between, okay, like this functional endurance-based street lifestyle seems to correlate really good with endurance performance.
Yeah, it certainly does. And you go back, their lifestyle is the Kenyan lifestyle is very much like the Paleolithic lifestyle. As children, how'd they get around? They walked and ran every place. There was no cars, basically. I grew up. I had bicycle I could get around town on. I had to walk to school every day because there wasn't any place to park your bike at school back in those days. But I had to walk to school. It was probably maybe, I don't know, mile and a half, something like that one way. So I got in 2 or 3 miles a day just walking to school and back. And that's what the Kenyans do, throughout their entire childhood. They're walking every place they go. They walk to the grocery stores and so forth. And I look back on that when I was a kid, and I thought it was horrible that I had to do all that walking. But looking back on it now, I thought, gosh, it's a great thing, actually. Now the kids, there's a grade school bar near our house, just a couple blocks away, and they don't have any school buses. This is a rather elite group of kids, wealthy families, and their families bring them to school every day. There's this long line of cars going to school every day, and there's nothing like that else. You don't see that really anyplace else in the world. Most other places walk to where they're going. These kids probably don't have to walk more than maybe at the very most a half mile to 2 miles, considering by how the houses are arranged here. And none of them do that. They all are driven to the school. And I was lucky that didn't have that happen. My parents never drove me to school. I always walked. But when I finally turned 16, I got my own car, and that was the end of walking. And that's kind of the way it is in our society. When you finally get the age where you can have a driver's license, you're done with all this other stuff, riding bicycles and walking and so forth. You're now going to be driving yourself every place you go.
Yeah. I know there'd be such a range of athletes, say for the purpose of this conversation, above the age of 40, who have lived the exact lifestyle, that modern lifestyle where it's been a little bit of luxury, it's been a little bit easier. That foundation of fitness that we naturally built up, however many years ago, is just no longer a part of our daily routine. And so they come into running as like a form of exercise to build fitness or to see improvement or whatever it might be. But as a result, they don't necessarily have like a functional strength or any real foundation to build upon. And so the natural niggles and injuries that come along with that would, I'm sure, be a key factor for so many of these athletes. Is that something that's been a standout with for the sake of your book, like the Fast Over 50 crew? There'd be such different groups of people making an entrance into the sport.
Yeah, people come from all sorts of backgrounds into endurance sports, as of all sports. And that's what I want to find out from these elite masters athletes is how they came to the sport. There's all kinds of things I want to find out about these people because there's something about them that is different. And maybe their lifestyle, as we just discussed, and maybe the fact that they grew up doing this their entire lives, walking and running and riding their bikes and all this kind of stuff to get from point A to point B. But I don't know yet. We're still in the early stages of doing this. I hadn't started the interview process yet. All I've done is just try to find out as much as I can about each athlete, the basic information. What have you accomplished? What's your age? Lots of little things like that. And now I've got to dig into it and find out the details of what's going on with these people. So I hope to be able, by the time I'm done with this, to say, this is what I found with elite masters athletes. This is what they all seem to have in common. There may not be anything. They may be in totally different lifestyles, but I suspect we're going to find there's something unique about their way they lived their lives growing up.
Yeah. I was going to ask you if there's anything that you're anticipating seeing it. So perhaps like the way they live their lives growing up. Is there anything else that you would think would be a standout point going in before the interview process even takes place?
Yeah, it could be things like, sleep. Is that ever been an issue for them? Or nutrition? What do they eat? What's what's um, what's their diet like? Um, stress in their lives. Some people, the one I'm writing this book right now, I know a lot of these people I'm writing to are 50 something athletes. A lot of them are in leadership positions in the companies they work at. They may even be the owners. That's not unusual. By the time you're in your 50s, you're usually in a leadership role. And that begins to change your lifestyle considerably. And so I'm addressing that issue too. How do we deal with this idea that, you've got the world on your shoulders every day because you're trying to run this company? How do you deal with that and still be an athlete, still be able to train like you should? And so I try to explain things that I've discovered along the way with topics like that. How do you deal with stress? And it's not an easy topic. It's a difficult topic, but it's the sort of thing that I think a lot of 50s experience because of just the fact that you're 50 some years old. You're usually in a leadership position.
Yeah. How much has your training changed post 50 compared to pre 50? Like, what were some of the standout features to you in terms of how, like, were noticeable differences in how your body responds to training or how athletes that you're coaching respond to certain styles of training? Like, I know we touched on the start about intensity versus volume, and that's one that seems to be a real key conversation at many age groups these days between like the Norwegian method and like the 80-20 principle and a couple of things that we've already touched on.
No doubt. I'm 81 years old, so I've been around for a while doing these sorts of things. I started when I was 12 years old. I started running, and so on track teams and junior high, high school, college. Continued after that to run. Took up cycling. Took up triathlon. Got a knee injury, which limited my running, so I'd stop running, which meant the end of triathlon. So I just became a cyclist. I did bike races for a number of years. So I've been through a lot of stuff with my training, with sport. And the biggest change for me in life happened when I was like a month after my 70th birthday, like 11 years ago. In fact, 11 years ago this month, I had a bike crash. And it was a life-changing accident. The one I just had that we talked about earlier is nothing compared to the one I had back then. That one I broke 7 bones, had a concussion. I had blood clots in both legs. I was in the intensive care for 6 days. It was gigantic, and that changed my life. When it was over, it took me a long time to come back. I had frozen, both my shoulders were frozen, which meant you can't raise your arms, so you can't do much. It's hard to even ride a bike because you can't reach the handlebars very easily. I couldn't run because everything was just too sore and tender still. So there wasn't much I could. I couldn't swim because I couldn't get my arms set to grab the water. So there really wasn't anything I could do other than go for walks. So I started walking a lot, and I realized that was good for me. I got a lot of good out of that. And I'd never done that before because that's basically slow running is what that is. I've done essentially a lot of slow running. I was just walking every day. In fact, it's very complicated, so I won't go into all the details, but that became a key element for me in making decisions about training my athletes eventually, was what I learned about myself and just all the walking I had to do because of this crash. At the same time, this happens after the crash, I start gaining weight very slowly. And so in 2 years, I realized, and then my weight has gone up like 5 pounds. And I've been the same weight since I had been in high school. Since my junior year in high school, I'd weighed the very same thing up until I was 70 years old, 154 pounds, 70 kg. So I was, it never changed. And then all of a sudden, my weight started going up in my early 70s. And so that made me rethink a lot of things about my diet, for example, and what I should be doing with as far as exercise is concerned to keep my weight under control. And so I've gone through all this stuff over the years. I've had so many, you're talking about your leg injuries from running. I've had probably every running injury you can possibly think of. Mostly Achilles and calf muscle strains and plantar fascias and ITBs and all the stuff that runners have problems with, plus stress fractures and I've had it all, and the reason was because I didn't know how to train. I haven't learned this thing about slow training yet. I was still on the notion that I had to do hard workouts to run fast. And that was the way I saw the world, because that was the way I was taught to do this. That's the way my coaches taught me to do it. You had to work out hard every day. My college coach had us do exactly the same workout 5 days a week. I was all called intervals till you puke. It was just the hardest workout you possibly imagine. And he made it all that much worse by doing things that coaches did back in those days, about cussing at you and telling you how stupid you are and how you need to be faster. And coaches in those days were just, all they were dictators.
Yeah.
And so basically I had a poor upbringing, and consequently I had to learn all this stuff the hard way by going through all these problems. And so things have come together for me finally over the last several years, and I'm starting to feel more comfortable with what I tell athletes to do today. That's why I feel more comfortable writing books for them today than I did initially.
You got to know, it's so comforting to hear a bloke who's been in the scene and had as much success in the scene as what you have speak about how long it took you to navigate your way through injuries. Because I think just by part of doing this podcast and coaching athletes, I've been open, sometimes to a fault about little niggles and things that I'm dealing with. And I often wonder, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've got to be open about the fact I've done another calf strain. And even though I'm coaching, I'm still navigating my way through the process myself. So it seems that no matter how much you read or how much you learn, there's no better research method than actually trying it out yourself and just seeing what works and what doesn't and making edits. Because I think I must have been on the tail end of what you just explained your college or high school experience was like, because I certainly had a couple of coaches who were very much, train until you puke. And I thought that makes sense because I'd seen the movie, I'd seen all the Rocky series, and I knew how he trained. And if you wanted to win the title, that was the way that you went about it. But yeah, there's certainly a point of diminishing returns, isn't there? And I think I feel like there's a lot of conversation in the scene at the moment, which is it's very easy to label something as like an old man injury and just leave it at that. And it gives you an excuse not to have to try and improve it or not to have to try and adjust your training. You just put it in the category of the old man injury. Unfortunately, it's just the nature of the game. But unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I've spoken to so many old men and women who are like, no, I dealt with that and here's how I fixed it. And you go, oh, okay. So it might, like, your susceptibility, if that's a word, like how susceptible you are to that particular injury might increase, but it's not like a death sentence to your running career just because you've hit a certain age.
I agree. Yeah. I'm going to write about that in like I think it's the 8th chapter. I write about injuries for athletes in this Fast After 50 book. And, one of the things that I realized about myself when I was going through all these injuries, I always thought if I just back off for a few days, it'll go away. That's always what the thing that went through my head was, the calf is feeling really tight. I need to just back off for a few days. In about 3 days, I'll be back to normal again. I can do anything I want. In the meantime, I'll just do some really slow, easy running. So, so all I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out an excuse to go out and run, but I know I can't run fast at this point. What I'm going to tell athletes in this book is, when you, at age 50, especially in your 50s and 60s, when you experience something that doesn't feel right, calf muscle, Achilles, whatever it may be, like knee, you need to have somebody you can go to right now. What I did when I was a young athlete, a young runner. So I ever get injured, I would plan on going away. I just figured it would go away if I just gave it enough time. I usually involved just doing some long, slow running, so it went away. And then sometimes it lasted for a long, long time. Sometimes I found out eventually that it was a stress fracture, and I had to stop running. I didn't find that out till maybe a week or two later that the thing wasn't going away. So I finally went to see a doctor about those sorts of things. And that's what I suggest to people over the age of 50 especially, is they need to have a team of professionals they can call on when they've got a problem like this. They're going to start, first of all, with a family doctor, more than likely. the family doctor may not be very good at this. Mine isn't. She's very good. But she does not really know sports injuries all that well, but she can send me to somebody else who can. So that's my starting point always is with her. I used to have where I used to live, I had a guy who was great at physiotherapy, or what you guys call, I think, physios.
Yeah.
We don't call them that here. We call them something else. I had a guy who was great at that. He was excellent. He was an athlete himself. He took care of professional athletes. He dealt with a huge crowd of athletes. I had a problem, I could go to him, but I found myself always kind of waiting to go to see him because I wanted to see if it'd go away first. So, or massage therapists, somebody who can actually help you with your problem rather than waiting to see if it goes away. When you're in your 50s and your 60s, it needs to be done now. You cannot wait to see if things are going to get better. You need to go get it taken care of after it's just happened. Otherwise, this thing may wind up becoming chronic, and then you're going to have a really hard time getting rid of it. That's probably more of a problem for those in their 50s and 60s than it is for younger athletes. If you're in your 20s, when I was in my 20s, if I got an injury just like that, I'd be back at it in no time at all, no problem. But in my 50s and 60s, that began to change. It took a lot more time to come back from these niggling little injuries that I didn't think very much of when I was much younger. So I think that's the key actually for all the agers. And I want to find out from the super agers how they deal with injuries too. If they have injuries, what kind of injuries do they have and how do they deal with it? So there's lots of stuff I want to find out yet from these people. But that's what I think is probably the answer, is to have somebody go to immediately as soon as it happens, to have it taken care of.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend about this on our long run the other day, about how as endurance athletes, you become very accustomed to putting up with mild discomfort always. And being able to differentiate between, all right, what is actually a serious injury that needs attention and what is just a little inflammation or a little tightness that's going to go away in a week just by itself, just seems to be the nature of the game. Like I don't know if this is just me. I feel pretty confident saying it because I've spoken to enough people to know that it seems to be universal. But most distance runners, at least at any one run, seem to have something that's like slightly uncomfortable, not necessarily up, it might be okay. But being able to differentiate between, all right, this is bad and this is going to be fine, is like a little bit of an art in itself.
Well, I heard the key is don't wait to try to decide. Go see somebody who can help you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just, if it's like a tight calf muscle, maybe you just need a massage therapist to work on it for you. I don't know what that would cost in Australia. Here in the US, it's about $100 to have a massage therapist do something like that. Spend an hour with a massage therapist working out the tightness of your calf muscle, or whatever it may be. That's the sort of thing you need to have, kind of like at your disposal. These are people I can call on when I have a problem, and I'm not going to wait until it becomes chronic. I'm going to take care of it now when it happens, because otherwise I'm going to wind up missing a lot of time, a lot of training, and that's going to hurt me also in the long term. When I come back, I got to step back and start over again on some of the same stuff I've been doing, and I had the risk of having the same injury coming back again. So my proposal to 50-something athletes is get it taken care of now. Don't wait.
Yeah, there's a lot of waiters. I know I put myself in that category. I'm a little bit younger. I've got 12 years up my sleeve, but I already noticed that in my own sort of running journey, a massage therapist has been a real benefit to me. I've actually taken a mental note that I'm going to book in with him after this session because I've probably left that break a little bit too long. So, like we've sort of touched on training, touched on assembling your own sort of personal team. Like from your perspective, have you got a certain group of people? I know you said the word physio before. I think you guys call them PTs, don't you? You've got yeah, you got a certain group in your team. Like when you had your bike accident a couple of weeks ago, you got a couple of people on call.
Yeah, well, that one was no brainer. I had to go to the emergency room, and it was a long story. I was a 6-hour drive from home when it happened, and I had to give a speech that night. So I spoke to a clinic, with broken bones and my elbow bleeding. And then the next morning I got up and drove 6 hours back home. I went immediately to the emergency room, and they put me back together again. And did a tremendous job of getting me back to on my feet again, everything working just as it should. And now I had to go through this process of healing because you just can't speed up the healing of a broken bone. But with other niggling little things I've had, and I've had so many, I've lost count. It's just probably in the hundreds by now. The thing that we should be doing, all of us, but especially 50 plus, is see somebody who knows what they're doing, get it taken care of now. Once it becomes chronic, if it becomes chronic, it can really be a problem then to get rid of it. So you might wind up missing a lot of training just because of something you thought was a niggling little injury. It may wind up being something that's really very serious for you.
When you say fast after 50, what is it that you chose 50 as the barrier to entry for the title of the book? Is that when, because I hear different points of when things, whether it's muscle strength or whatever, starts to diminish if you're not on top of it. Was that a strategic thing? Or, the title flows nicely.
It does. I'll tell you where it came from. When I composed the book through my publisher back in, I think it's about 2012, I proposed I wanted to write it for, I wanted to write for older athletes. I didn't really nail it down to an age. They came back to me and said, why don't we make it fast after 40? I said, absolutely not. People in their 40s they're not old. We have a long ways to go yet. I wanted to make it 60, fast after 60. And I for sure that by the age of 60, there are problems you're dealing with on a daily basis if you're an athlete. So we kind of compromised on 50. And then when I started back on the research on 50-year-old athletes and started piecing together this book based on what I could find out about the aging process. 50 turned out to be a pretty good point in time. For example, give you little things like, for example, you lose something like about 2% of your muscle mass in your 30s. Not even noticeable. You're not aware of it. That doesn't change much in your 40s. But in your 50s, it becomes 8%. You lose 8% of your muscle mass on average. And this is, across the population. This is not everybody. But this is the general average. You lose 8% of your muscle mass by the time you're in your 50s. Bone mineral density, we can look at the same sort of thing. That's changing on the same sort of scale. It doesn't change much, but when you get in your 50s, it takes a change up. It really starts happening at a much faster rate. And I can go through all kinds of stuff I discovered like this. Type 2 diabetes mellitus, it becomes much higher risk in your 50s than it does anytime prior to that. So it seems like a lot of stuff is happening to us in our 50s. So it's a concerning point in time for most athletes, as it should be. And so I think the compromise we made on making it fast after 50 was a good one. And I'm really happy we did that, because this, I think, is really a good place to start pointing out to people, we're at a stage right now in life where you can still make changes to improve. Not necessarily your performance, but improve your health, improve lots of aspects about your lifespan, for example. Because things are happening right now that are going to threaten your health and threaten your lifespan. And we can turn that around right now if you start doing things that we found to be helpful in preventing that from happening.
Yeah, I listen to a number of people who start to, there's so many different philosophies or so many different approaches. I know you said that it was just on average across the population that 8% of the muscle mass sort of drops off. So what I'm about to say is not counter to that. But you see some people in their 50s who they're doing something right, because you look at them and they look as good as ever. They look as strong as ever. They look as fit as ever, which I find really encouraging. But are you speaking about just being focused on things like your strength training, being focused on flexibility, recovery, that kind of stuff? Like, what would be a couple of other key standout points that you're like, all right, this is just your non-negotiables. Now you're at this age bracket, you cannot overlook this. Like from we've got the medical team on our side, we've got the training structure set up. Like, what else would go into that same kind of category of non-negotiables?
Strength training, you mentioned, is number one. You got to be doing strength training. Yeah. You got to be doing flexibility training as you get older. You lose that flexibility. You got to be doing mobility training, which is the ability of a joint to rotate or move easily through a real wide range of motion. That's something we start losing in our 50s also. It starts going downhill. So there are these things like that we need to be very focused on, physical things that we need to be very focused on to make sure that we're maintaining our body, because if we don't, it's going to catch up with you. For example, if you don't strength train, you're not strength training in your 50s, I feel sorry for you when you're in your 60s. It's going to be a real problem for you at that age. Strength training not only provides more muscle, it also provides more bone density. Runners like yourself don't have to worry about this so much from the waist down, but upper body, yeah, you do. Upper body for a runner, for a swimmer, there's not much there as far as bone density, muscle mass. Saw a picture the other day of a woman, and I forgot her age now, but I think she was in her 60s maybe, and she ran a 28-minute 10K, and showed her coming across the finish line. And I was amazed at how little muscle she had above the waist. Below the waist, she looked really good. Her legs are obviously strong, but above the waist, her biceps were smaller than my wrists. There just was nothing there.
What did you say? She been was it 38 minutes? You said.
But I think it was 38 minutes. I saw, yeah.
Wow.
That she ran in her, and I forgot her exact age. She was either in her late 60s or early 70s, and she ran a 38-minute 10K. And then it struck me as being that's really a good time. And then I looked at the picture after I read the article. I've realized that she's not taking care of her upper body. That's going to be a problem for her as she gets older. So that's the sort of thing that we need to be focused on as you're aging. Is you've got to have your muscle taken care of, bone taken care of, and strength training is a key to that. Mobility, flexibility. These are all things you need to be focused on. So it's not just running or riding your bike. It's also the gym. You've got to be doing things to take care of your body. You can't put it off until you're 80 years old. It's got to be done now, because you wait till then, it's too late.
Yeah.
And you have a very hard time making your body go through any kind of change at all when you get in your 80s, but you can maintain things very nicely all the way through if you keep working at it.
Yeah, I was speaking to Lawrence Van Lingen. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's sort of a movement coaching a variety of sports. But one of the things that him and I were speaking about was the difference between sort of flexibility and mobility. And it is interesting because yoga's become very popular amongst a lot of athletes today, and flexibility has. But mobility is one that I think, at least to me, it's a newer concept on my radar, and something that I've been trying to implement a little bit. But when you say mobility, like, is there certain movement patterns that you're focused on specifically, like, or is it just making sure, like, whatever your weak points are or potential weak points are targeted?
I'd like to find out what the athlete's weak points are.
Yeah.
For example, hip mobility is really fairly common in older athletes. They just can't move their legs at the hip through a broad range of motion. But there are things they can do to improve that. It takes some time, not a lot of time. It takes some time to do it, but you got to be very dedicated to it. You got to do it like probably at least twice a week, preferably 3 times a week. You're working on hip mobility, or maybe it's lower back mobility. Your lower back is very tight, and that happens to a lot of people when they get in their 50s. Is their low back is just very tense all the time. So they don't have the mobility there. And that shows up in running, especially shows up in cycling also. If your hips are tight, if your lower back, is tight. And so there's things we can be doing for that to improve that mobility, that range of motion of your hips being able to move around around your spinal column at the lumbar area. That's a key one. Swimmers, I see a lot of swimmers. If you look at really young swimmers, you'd just be amazed at their shoulder mobility. If you watch like the Olympics, you watch the swimming performances, you see before the swim, you'll see swimmers getting warmed up before they get on the blocks, and they've got this amazing shoulder mobility when they're in their 20s. They can just do amazing things. They can touch the middle of their back, from any angle you want. And they do these exercises that show they have tremendous mobility. But when you're older, you'll find you can't do that anymore. It goes away. So that swimmer, maybe in his 20s, he can do this. But I would guess if they don't do anything about it between now and then, by the time they're in their 50s, won't be able to scratch their back anymore, because then we lose that mobility if you don't do it. So if it's use it or lose it. If you don't use your joints, they don't move through the same range of motion anymore.
Yeah. One thing that I was listening to Tom Brady's book on longevity, or it's more of a book about his own career in the NFL and how he did such a long. Have you read it?
Hmm.
No,
I know it's Bob Brady, though.
yeah. So I'm not a huge fan of NFL necessarily, but I like Tom Brady, and I was looking at his I wanted to hear about how he achieved such longevity, and he speaks a lot about pliability, like your muscles' ability to contract and release, and how that's been so beneficial in him copping like heavy impacts week in, week out for so many years. And he speaks about a number of the exercises that he does for that. But I noticed this as well, like, and I wondered how much it was to do with my calf strains, is like there's a certain amount of tension that my body just seems to not be able to navigate its way through. And it is interesting because I'll look at my young boys. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and the idea of pliability and mobility, it's so foreign to them because it's so natural to them. It's not something they would ever think about. But I look at my boys jumping on a trampoline or sprinting or moving, and the range of motion that they have in it, like that swimmer, they can touch their back from any angle as well, the middle of their back. It's kind of unbelievable, and really, it's been a reminder to me to really invest in this part, because there's certain things I'll see them do without even thinking that I'll try and do, and I go, oh my gosh, like that range of motion's a little limited in me at the moment. So it's what's the quote? I'm trying to think of it. Like, yeah, things that you don't touch essentially turns to chaos. Like, that's for lack of a better description. Like, weeds going to grow in your garden if you don't pay attention to it. So essentially, it's just, okay, become aware, come up with a practice, be consistent. Like, results will come. It's not you're not a victim of your age necessarily. I mean, eventually we all are, aren't we? But like when it comes to performance at this particular age group, there's plenty that we can do.
That's true. Yeah, there are people actually who are much older than I am, who are amazing athletes, because and the reason why is because they've done it their entire lives.
Yeah.
So age doesn't have to mean that it's the end of your career as a runner.
Yeah,
doesn't have to mean that at all, because you can continue doing this for decades. I had a friend who just died. I may have told you about this before, forgotten. Who died last summer at age 92. He was a triathlete. He held the course record for the age 70 group at Ironman Hawaii. Tremendous athlete. He worked out every day, swim, bike, and run. The day he died at age 92, he had done a run on the treadmill and rode his bike that day, and he had he died that same day. So he was healthy right up until the very end. Within minutes of his death, he was still training, and he was a good athlete. It wasn't like he was just some old slow guy going out there walking all the time. He was still an athlete at age 92. There's a guy in France named Robert Marchand, who was when he was 103 years old. He set the world's record for the hour time on the track, on bicycle. How far can you go in an hour on the track? And he set the age group for 130, which is not a big deal because there really wasn't much of a time record for that. But he decided from his 105 to come back and see if he can go faster. So he finds some coaches to work with him. They improve his VO2 max by 13%, and he winds up taking several minutes off of his, or several taking almost a kilometer off of his previous best time 2 years earlier. He did something like, I've forgotten, like 35 kilometers in an hour at age 105. So that, this is not just luck. This is because these people did this. This guy trained every day. He rode his bike every day. The time he was like in his 20s, he was a cyclist, dedicated to it. And I kept on going right till the very end. My friend who died at age 92, same thing. He was an athlete his entire life. And right up until the very end, he was an athlete. So this age doesn't mean it's the end. Eventually there will be an end, but you can still do things that are quite remarkable for your age. Regardless of what your age is, you can still do it if you keep it going. If you stop for 10 years, forget it. It's all over. You've got to be dedicated to it. You got to keep on doing it every day, any day you can. You are out there exercising, working out, watching your diet, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. What does your own training routine look like at the moment, Joe? Like, I'm not sure if it's a little bit a little different based on the accident a couple of months ago, or whether you're right back into it. But have you got a pretty solid structure in place?
Yeah, I do. Summertime is when I live in northern Arizona, the mountains of northern Arizona. And in the wintertime, we get quite a bit of snow, but our summers are really nice, except they're really, really hot. And so my summers, I'm a cyclist. And so I put in 2 to 3 hours a day, 6 days a week. I take one day off every week. 6 days a week, I'm doing that on the bike in the summer months. And that usually runs from like April until November, something like that. So I'm like 2 to 3 hours a day on the bike, 6 days a week. And then I'm training just like I did when I don't race anymore, but if I train exactly the same way as when I was racing. And then in the wintertime, things begin to change. The weather becomes a little difficult around here to ride your bike a lot. So I wait until the afternoon to ride my bike. And it's usually just going to have a very short span of warmth. Around 2:30, 3 o'clock, it's warm. And so I'll put in an hour and a half on the bike in the afternoons to take advantage of that warm weather. In the morning, I take my wife for a walk. We walk for about an hour. We'll cover something like 5 kilometers in an hour, which is nothing great, but it's very good because it's also aerobic, and it's developing the same aerobic system that the bike is developing, only in a slightly different way. It doesn't overlap 100%, but we're getting some overlap from the two. So that's my winter routine. Is I walk an hour in the morning briskly with my wife, and then I ride an hour in the afternoon or an hour and a half. In the summertime, 2 to 3 hours on the bike every 6 days a week.
Wow.
I do that all the time. It's just been that way for years.
That's awesome. And are you doing much strength of your own?
That'd be strength training twice a week. I've got a gym in my garage. When we buy a house anymore, which doesn't happen real frequently, I'm proud to say. When we buy a house anymore, one of the things we look for is working. We had a gym in the house, and so we bought a house with a 3-bay garage here back about 6 years ago. So one of the bays in my garage is my gym, and so I've got everything I need in there for all the work I'm going to do, upper body, lower body, mobility, stretching, all that kind of stuff. I've got all the equipment out there in the garage.
So good. That's so good. Joe, I'll have to get a link to the book so I can put it in the show notes when it's released. When did you say? The middle of the year you reckon it'll come out?
I think it'll be late 2025.
Okay.
I'll have it written probably by midsummer, but it takes a while to get it published.
Yeah, for sure. No, awesome. It's exciting. Well, Joe, I know it's getting, what is it? Probably evening over there. You'd be wrapping up the day.
It's about 5:45 p.m.
I'll let you go and enjoy your afternoon or your evening.
Okay.
But I've been looking forward to it. Thanks so much for making the time. And yeah, it's always great to talk to you. I've had the Triathlon Training Bible on repeat on Audible recently, which I've really enjoyed. And I'm looking forward to getting my hands on this Fast After 50. And yeah, I'm pumped for everyone to hear this episode. So Joe, thanks again. As always, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ty. It's any kind of sign. I enjoyed it.